There was a woman who walked onto stages with bare feet and a bottle in her hand. When she opened her mouth, entire stadiums forgot how to breathe. But behind that voice, behind the laughter and the feathers and the whiskey, there was something quieter. Something that hurt. And in the autumn of 1968, that quiet thing inside her was about to be tested by words that would never leave her. Most people remember Janis Joplin for the explosions. The screams that tore through Monterey. The way her voice could shake a room until the windows rattled. But the real story of Janis Joplin was never about how loud she could sing. It was about why she had to sing that loud in the first place. And in the late 1960s, in a music scene that was beginning to define itself in tribes and territories, there were people who did not want her voice in their conversation. People who believed that what she was doing was not music at all. People with their own legends to protect. This is the story of two artists, two visions, and one moment that pushed Janis Joplin further than anyone expected her to go. The year was 1968. San Francisco was the center of a new American sound. The hills were full of musicians who had come from everywhere, looking for something they could not name. The Fillmore Auditorium opened its doors every weekend to bands that were inventing themselves in real time. And among all of these searching, restless, hungry musicians, two figures stood out for very different reasons. One was a young man with a dark mustache and a careful, intellectual confidence. His name was David Crosby. He had been a member of the Byrds, a band that had taken the words of Bob Dylan and turned them into glittering, jangling folk rock. He was articulate. He was outspoken. He had opinions about almost everything, and he was not afraid to share them with anyone who would listen, including journalists who were always eager to print what he said. The other was a young woman from Port Arthur, Texas. Her name was Janis Joplin. She had grown up being told that she did not belong. The kids in her hometown had mocked her appearance, her interests, her way of speaking. She had carried that wound across an entire country, all the way to California, where she had finally found a band called Big Brother and the Holding Company. With them, she had walked onto the stage at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 and torn the audience apart with a song called Ball and Chain. Overnight, the world knew her name. But fame did not heal the wound. Fame only made it visible. By 1968, Janis was caught in a strange position. She was the most exciting new voice in American rock music. She was on the cover of magazines. She was being compared to Aretha Franklin and Bessie Smith and Billie Holiday, all in the same breath. And yet, in certain corners of the music industry, there were whispers. Quiet conversations between musicians. Comments dropped in interviews. The kind of remarks that travel slowly but cut deeply. Some musicians of the era believed that the real future of rock music was in craft. In careful arrangements. In intricate harmonies. In studio precision. They listened to what bands like the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield were doing, and they heard the next evolution of popular music. Polished. Layered. Sophisticated. And when those musicians looked at Janis Joplin and her band, they did not always see music. They sometimes saw chaos. They saw a woman screaming her lungs out over a band that, by their standards, was not technically tight. They saw something raw and unfinished, and, to their ears, unfocused. David Crosby was one of the musicians who held strong opinions about what rock music should be. In interviews from that era, he was famously direct about the bands he admired and the ones he did not. He spoke openly about craft, about precision, about the importance of harmony and arrangement. He believed deeply in the music he was making, and he was not shy about contrasting it with music he found less interesting. It is important to be fair here. Crosby was not a villain. He was a serious artist with serious convictions. He had helped create some of the most beautiful vocal harmonies in American music history. He had a vision, and he defended that vision with the same passion that any artist defends what they love. He had every right to his opinions, and many people shared them. But for Janis Joplin, who had spent her entire life being told that she was too much, too loud, too messy, too strange, Hearing those kinds of comments from inside the music community was different from hearing them from her childhood bullies. These were her peers. These were people whose opinions, whether she admitted it or not, mattered to her. The exact words that reached Janis are something the historical record handles carefully. There were comments in music magazines about the rawness of Big Brother and the holding company. There were quotes from established musicians questioning whether her vocal style was sustainable, whether it was disciplined, whether it was real musicianship. Some of these comments were attributed to specific names. Others floated through the scene as rumors that everyone seemed to have heard from someone else. What we know for certain is that by the autumn of 1968, Janis Joplin was hearing, in one form or another, that she was not considered a real musician by some of the people she shared a city with. She was sitting in a hotel room in New York. The radio was on. A friend had brought her a music magazine, the kind that everyone in the industry read. Inside, there was an interview with a well-known musician of the era. The interview touched on the state of rock music. It discussed the difference between bands that, in the speaker's view, took their craft seriously and bands that, in the speaker's view, did not. There were comparisons. There were judgments. And although the speaker did not always name names directly, the implications were clear enough that anyone in the scene could read between the lines. Janis read the article twice. She set the magazine down. She lit a cigarette. She did not say anything for a long time. Her road manager, John Cook, would later describe the silence in that room. He said that Janis was someone who usually filled silences with jokes, with whiskey, with stories from the road. But that afternoon, she just sat there, looking out the window, watching the traffic move below. Finally, she spoke. She said something simple. She said that she was tired of being told she was not enough. She said it in a voice that was not angry. It was not even sad. It was just tired. The voice of someone who had been hearing the same message her entire life, dressed up in different clothes. But here is where the story turns. Because Janis Joplin had a way of taking the things that hurt her and turning them into something else. Something other people could feel. Something that lasted. She walked out of that hotel room and into the rest of her tour. And then she walked into the studio. The album she was about to record with Big Brother and the holding company was called Cheap Thrills. It had been a difficult project from the start. There were tensions in the band. There were arguments with the producer, John Simon. There were debates about whether the album should sound polished or whether it should capture the live energy that had made Janis a star. The band wanted it raw. The producer wanted it cleaner. Janis was caught in the middle. But after that magazine article, after those comments, something shifted in her. She began to push the recordings harder. She insisted that her vocals be allowed to break, to crack, to go places that no producer would normally allow. She did not want to sound perfect. She wanted to sound true. The band recorded a song called Piece of My Heart. It had been written by Jerry Ragavoy and Byrds, and it had been recorded before by Irma Franklin, the older sister of Aretha Franklin. Irma's version was beautiful, soulful, controlled. But when Janis sang it, she did something different. She tore it open. She let her voice scrape against the edge of what a voice can do. She turned a soul song into something that sounded like a confession and an accusation at the same time. When the producer played the take back, the room went silent. Even the people who had been arguing with each other for weeks stopped arguing. They knew what they had just heard. Cheap Thrills was released in August of 1968. Within 4 weeks, it was the #1 album in the United States of America. It stayed at #1 for 8 weeks. It sold over 1 million copies before the end of the year. The critics, even the ones who had been skeptical, began to write differently about Janis Joplin. They began to use words like icon, like phenomenon, like generational. The same magazines that had once printed comments questioning her musicianship now ran cover stories about her as the future of American rock. Meanwhile, the album by the well-known musician whose interview had cut her so deeply was performing well, but it was not at #1. It was not selling at the same pace. The numbers, cold and impersonal as they were, told a story of their own. But the real victory, if you can call it that, was not in the sales figures. It was not in the chart positions. It was in something quieter. Something that happened in living rooms across the country, in dorm rooms, in cars, in places where young people were listening to Cheap Thrills for the first time and feeling something they had never felt before. A girl in Ohio, listening on her brother's record player, would later say that hearing Janis sing "Piece of My Heart" was the first time she had ever felt that her own pain was allowed to exist. A young man in Detroit, working a factory job, would later say that Janis sounded like every feeling he had ever been told to keep inside. A woman in Nashville, who had been told her whole life that she was not pretty enough, not quiet enough, not the right kind of woman, would later say that Janis gave her permission to be herself for the first time. That was the answer. Not the chart numbers. Not the magazine covers. Not the awards. The answer was that millions of people had heard a voice that the experts had questioned, and they had recognized it as the truth. Now, here is where it is important to be careful. Because the easy version of this story is to make David Crosby into a villain and Janis Joplin into a hero. But that is not really what happened, and it is not really what either of them deserved. Crosby was an artist with a vision. His vision happened to be different from Janis's vision. He believed in harmony and craft. She believed in rawness and feeling. Both visions are valid. Both visions have shaped American music in profound ways. The Byrds and Crosby, Stills and Nash, the supergroup that Crosby would help form a year later, would create some of the most beautiful and influential music of the 20th century. Their harmonies are still studied. Their songs are still loved. Crosby's contributions to American music are immense. And Janis, in her own way, would later acknowledge that the comments that had hurt her were also, in a strange way, gifts. Because they had pushed her. They had made her insist on her own voice when it would have been easier to soften it. They had clarified, for her, what kind of singer she wanted to be. In an interview later in 1969, when a reporter asked her about the criticism she had received from other musicians, Janis is said to have laughed. She is said to have shrugged. She is said to have lit another cigarette and said something close to this, that everyone has the right to their opinion, and that she had the right to keep singing the way she sang, and that the audience would decide who was right. The audience did decide. And the audience kept deciding. Year after year. Decade after decade. Cheap Thrills is now considered one of the greatest rock albums ever made. Piece of My Heart is now considered one of the greatest rock vocal performances ever recorded. Janis Joplin's voice is now studied in vocal schools and music conservatories. The same vocal style that some had once dismissed as undisciplined is now taught as a model of emotional commitment. David Crosby, in interviews given many years later, spoke with great respect about Janis Joplin. He acknowledged her power. He acknowledged her gift. Whatever tensions may have existed in the late 1960s between different musical philosophies, those tensions softened over time, as they often do. Crosby was, by all accounts, a man capable of revising his views. He praised many artists in his later years whom he had been more critical of in his youth. That kind of growth is one of the marks of a serious artist. So what do we take from this story? Maybe the lesson is not that Janis Joplin defeated David Crosby. Because she did not. They were never really in competition. They were operating in different lanes, chasing different sounds, building different legacies. Maybe the lesson is something else. Maybe it is about what artists do with the words that hurt them. Maybe it is about how criticism, even when it stings, can become fuel. Maybe it is about how the people who tell you that you are not enough are sometimes giving you, without knowing it, the exact push you needed to become more of yourself. Janis took the comments that had been made about her musicianship, and instead of trying to prove she could play more carefully, she leaned harder into her own way of making music. She did not become someone else's idea of a real musician. She became a more complete version of the musician she already was. And that, in the end, was the most powerful response she could have made. There is a moment, in a documentary made many years after Janis's death, where her sister, Laura Joplin, talks about the criticism that Janis received during her lifetime. Laura says that Janis was always sensitive to what other people thought of her. That she carried every cruel word with her, no matter how successful she became. But Laura also says that Janis had a kind of stubbornness underneath the sensitivity. A stubbornness that said, "You can say what you want about me, but I am going to keep singing my own song." That stubbornness is what we hear when we listen to Cheap Thrills today. That stubbornness is in every cracked note, every held syllable, every moment where her voice goes somewhere it probably should not go, and then somehow makes it back. It is the sound of a woman who has been told she is not enough and who has decided, anyway, to be exactly who she is. Janis Joplin died on October 4, 1970. She was 27 years old. She left behind one more album, recorded in the last weeks of her life, called Pearl. That album, released after her death, also went to #1. It contained a song called Me and Bobby McGee, written by Chris Christopherson, that became one of the defining recordings of the era. She was gone before she had a chance to fully see what she had built. She was gone before she could read all the books that would be written about her, all the academic papers that would analyze her vocal technique, all the tributes from younger singers who would name her as the reason they had picked up a microphone. But here is what she did get to see. She got to see her album reach #1. She got to see her band fill stadiums. She got to see fans, thousands of them, singing her words back to her in the rain at Woodstock. She got to see, even briefly, that the audience had heard her. That her voice had reached them. That the criticisms, whatever they had been, had not stopped the connection from happening. That has to count for something. There is a story that gets told about Janis from her last few months of life. She was at a recording session for the album that would become Pearl. She was tired. She had been working hard. Someone in the studio asked her how she was feeling about everything. About the music. About the future. About all the noise that had surrounded her career. She is said to have smiled and said that she was just trying to sing the songs the way she heard them. That was all. That was the whole job. To sing the songs the way she heard them, and to let the people decide what they thought. That answer, simple as it is, may be the real heart of this story. Because what Janis Joplin understood, and what every artist eventually has to understand, is that you cannot control what other people will say about your work. You cannot control whether they will call you a real musician or not. You cannot control whether they will respect your craft or dismiss it. You cannot control the magazine articles, the comments backstage, the whispers in green rooms. The only thing you can control is the song. The way you sing it. The truth you put into it. Whether you give it everything you have, or whether you hold back to make it more acceptable to people who are never going to accept it anyway. Janis chose, again and again, to give it everything she had. That is why we still listen to her, more than 50 years after her death. Not because she won an argument with another musician. Not because she sold more records. Not because she was crowned the queen of anything. We listen to her because she sang the songs the way she heard them. Because she did not make herself smaller to fit somebody else's idea of music. And that lesson, the lesson of staying true to your own voice even when respected people tell you it is not enough, is one of the reasons her legacy has lasted. So the next time you hear Piece of My Heart on the radio, or you see her face on a poster in a record store, or you watch the old footage of her dancing barefoot in front of 500,000 people, remember this. That voice you are hearing was almost talked out of existence. That voice was questioned, doubted, criticized by some of the most respected musicians of its time. That voice was told, in 100 different ways, that it was not real, not disciplined, not the future. And that voice answered the only way it knew how. By singing. By singing louder. By singing rawer. By singing until the doubt did not matter anymore, because the song had already done its work. That is the real story of what happened in the autumn of 1968. Not a cage match between two famous musicians. Not a battle of egos. Just a woman from Port Arthur, Texas, who had been told her whole life that she was not enough, finding one more reason to prove the doubters wrong by doing the only thing she had ever really known how to do. She opened her mouth. And she let everything out. And the world, all these years later, is still listening. There is one more thing worth saying before we close this story. It is something that often gets lost in the dramatic retellings. Both David Crosby and Janis Joplin were, in their own ways, survivors of an industry that could be brutal to artists who cared deeply about what they were making. They were both serious people, doing serious work, in a moment when the world around them was changing faster than anyone could keep up with. The fact that they had different visions of what rock music should be does not diminish either of them. If anything, it shows how rich and varied that era was. You could have Crosby's careful harmonies and Joplin's torn open vocals existing in the same year, on the same charts, in the same conversation. You could have folk rock and blues rock and psychedelia and soul all sharing the airwaves. That diversity is what made the late 1960s one of the most extraordinary periods in popular music history. So when we tell this story, we should tell it without picking a side. Crosby was right about some things. Joplin was right about some things. Both of them gave us music that has outlasted the disagreements they may have had with each other. Both of them deserve to be remembered for what they made, not for what they may have said about each other in passing during one heated decade. What we can take from this story, more than anything, is the reminder that artists are human beings. They have moods. They have insecurities. They have moments when they say things they might later wish they had not said. They have moments when they are wounded by words and respond by working harder. None of that diminishes them. All of it makes them more real. And Janis Joplin, for all her vulnerability, for all her sensitivity to what others thought of her, gave the world a kind of honesty that artists are still trying to match. She showed us that you do not have to be polished to be powerful. You do not have to be approved of to be true. You do not have to win the argument. You just have to keep singing. That is the gift she left behind. That is the reason her name still matters. She sang the songs the way she heard them. And the world has been listening ever since.